Hello. It's a pleasure to be here because I am a psychiatrist of Sorocaba, and I would like to ask you about the biological factors, the hormonal influences that you think that has to do possible with the gender or the expression of gender. And because there are some researchers in Denmark that they asked about the work of men and work of women, and they wanted to prove that the woman has some natural skills and the men others. And what do you think about this kind of thinking, including the biological factors?
I think it's well established that there are hormonal differences, chromosomal differences, physiological differences that for the most part hold between men and women, although there are also enormous variations, especially in terms of chromosomes and in terms of hormonal levels. So it's important to see that although we work with a binary idea of the sexes, both hormonal and endocrinological and genetic research has found an interesting degree of overlap and prefers to, for the most part, to think about a continuum rather than a dyad. But perhaps the most important answer to your question has to do with how we understand these physiological or biological factors. Are they causal? Are they deterministic? In other words, if we have a certain hormone, does that imply necessarily that we will look a certain way, feel a certain way, act a certain way, or have a certain self-understanding? We accept that there are hormones and that sometimes there are hormonal differences that are significant without accepting the idea that these causally determine our social function, our self-understanding, or our sexuality, or even our gender presentation. Hormones are interactive. Genes are interactive. Genes get activated under certain environmental conditions, and there are a number of possible ways for them to express themselves. So what becomes realized depends in part on the life that's being lived, where and how. Even neurons, if we found neurological differences between the sexes, neurons also interact with environment. But if we reject the interactive approach and take an approach of causal determinism, then we're back to this very, very conservative and scientifically not very smart view, right? It's a scientifically weak view, right? That once we have these factors identified, we can then predict gender, sexuality, self-understanding, interpretation, self-interpretation. I think we can't allow that particular model to triumph.